My name is Peter Wesker. I'm a marine biologist and a retired deep-sea diver. I know this will sound unusual, but I have a story to tell you and you need to hear it. Nobody else will. Nobody else wants to believe me, not even those that saw it firsthand. In 2007, while working for a small deep-sea salvaging corporation, my crew and I discovered something beneath an oil rig. What was it, you ask? We don't know, nor do we want to know. But you might. In our field, we're often hired by local authorities and even sometimes international ones to help with missing person cases and even potential murders on occasion. A few weeks ago, I forwarded a transcript request to one of my colleagues, hoping they still had enough pull in the business to net me the information I needed. On December 9, 2007, Singaporean citizen Yi Wei went missing while working as a maintenance worker on an offshore oil rig. Due to the nature of the disappearance, and that he was not found aboard the rig, Wei was presumed dead with cause unknown. After deployment, the team scoured the ocean floor around the drilling rig and made several reports to their topside surface team, Team 2, via low-frequency radio. The team reported noises coming from the ocean floor, but became anxious and had trouble describing the sounds. Topside gave the order to continue the investigation under the assumption the noises were caused by the drilling mechanisms beneath the sand and rock. Team 3 continued with the task of locating any remains and any potential signs of foul play. One of the co-workers suggested a weight may have been tied to Wei's legs, but the proposal was dismissed as baseless conjecture. 30 minutes into the dive, Team 3 resumed their reports of noises coming from the ocean floor, increasing in amplification as time went on. Team 3 made a request to be immediately extracted from the water. Topside began preparations for decompression and organized surfacing procedures. That was it. You already know a lot of the story, so I'll cut to the part you probably want to hear. We were underwater at a pretty ridiculous depth. To put it into perspective, Everest reaches 29,035 feet. This drill, just beneath the surface, would go on for another 30,000 ft on top of the 400 ft between the sand and the water surface. We were right down at the ocean floor. You never really get used to the sensation at being at such incredible depths. Having an endless abyss of darkness all around you, knowing you can't swim to the surface because if you do, you'll probably die on the way. There's such a heavy feeling of reliance on the surface team to get you out of there that you begin to feel a little helpless. The noise didn't help. We were searching around the metal supports of the oil rig structure, basically 4 massive pylons thrust into the ocean floor to hold the surface platform up. It was ridiculously daunting and large under the water, with rust caked all over the surface of the metal, and more algae than I thought I'd ever have to see. A couple of small schools of fish circled us as we scoured the place from, well, bottom to bottom. That was when the noise began. It was subtle at first, and it wasn't just one sound. It was like a mix between a roller door opening and a mesh sliding door opening and closing loudly, but at the same time so distant and quiet. But it didn't go away. T-32, Mike, do you hear that? I remember asking to my co-diver, Mike Davis. I was using my flashlight to search the sand for any source, but the visibility was so poor I could barely see 50 ft ahead. It still sounded incredibly distant, like it was far, far beneath the surface. The drill? Keller, our rookie diver, asked. Not a chance. That's at least another 30,000 feet down below us. I continued scouring the floor, but the sound started to grow louder, and yet the volume remained the same. It was growing. Closer. Radio topside. That shit gives me the jeebs. I proceeded to oblige and radio in to our surface team that there was an unconfirmed noise originating from beneath the surface. After a little while, they gave the order to continue the search. Reluctantly, we did, until the noise grew again, and again, and again. It had slowly turned from 2 separate little sounds to a single loud noise, like an air raid siren screeching at us from below the depths. It continued to rise closer and closer, and we could feel the ocean floor shaking. What the fuck? See, call surface. Call surface, Wesker! I cursed and made the call to ready the decompression chamber. We were leaving then and there, whether they agreed to it or not. The noise continued to roar towards us, and the sand was shifting with its vibrations. My first thought was that the drill beneath the surface had broken and was coming up towards us. But it didn't take me long to disregard that as utter nonsense. Every option, every potential ripped through my mind as we swam upwards as far as we safely could, while waiting for the diving bell to be delayed. The noise grew closer and closer until I was certain it was about to burst straight out of the sand. "Okay, that's as high as we can go. Stop here," I shouted to my two co-divers, knowing this was the limit before hypoxia could set in. I calculated that on instinct, but checked my depth meter to confirm. "Are you kidding? Whatever the fuck that is isn't something I'm going to stick around to meet. If you try and surface, you know exactly what will happen." The noise was just below the surface, its rising and falling blood-curdling screech making my stomach drop. I checked my sub-to-surface radio for replies, but static was the only noise coming through. They should have deployed the bell and confirmed by that point. Our inter-team comms were still operational though. "I'll take my chances," Keller shouted over the radio. I cursed again, but the noise drowned out any sound I had. It was so close I could practically reach out and touch the sound, its vibrations tearing through the water and sending ripples upwards, outwards, and in all directions. I saw the silhouette of a diver resuming his stroke upwards, before I shut my eyes as my head throbbed from the sound. It was only that point that I realized I couldn't even hear Davis talking anymore. Eventually, I must have blacked out. When I awoke, I was topside, being assessed by the auxiliary diver after decompression. In my hazy confusion, I never found out if Keller or Davis survived. Nothing significant happened from there, except a stern talking to from our dive commander. I was never to speak of this again to anyone, or consequences would be dire. That was it. That was my anticlimactic conclusion. Whatever happened while we were out cold, whatever they found down there had to be in the rest of that report. No matter the cost, I need to find out. I used to work as a radio tech for offshore oil rigs. I quit after my first job. When we strapped ourselves into the helicopter seats, 3 days and a massive storm had passed since there had been any communication from the oil rig. A radio mechanic in training, my boss was taking me along for my first trip offshore. We were checking up on the communication equipment to figure out why contact had been lost. The oil rig loomed in the distance, huge and imposing, and out of place against the dark gray sea. I don't think anyone can look at one of those monstrosities without thinking that it's somehow wrong. We're putting people out there, in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by high seas and battered by storms, in order to pump dead dinosaurs out of the ocean floor. I had seen a rig up close once before while sailing. Then waves the size of small houses, wind whipping rain into our faces. And at every crest of a wave, the metal giant loomed above us. With the flaring gas shooting flames into the winds, I thought this must be what hell is like. Even now, approaching in a helicopter, seas quiet and the sky overcast but not stormy, the thought of hell seemed appropriate. I tugged at the yellow survival suit they had put me in, hoping I wouldn't need it. My contemplations were broken only by the pilot's intermittent attempts at contacting the rig and the radio silence that followed. As we drew closer to our goal, the rig came into focus. I squinted at it. Sure, it would look like an anthill. Little people crawling all over, trying to repair the damages of the unexpectedly strong storm. To my surprise, I couldn't make out a single person. Even as the pilot circled the structure, closing in on the helicopter landing pad, nothing moved on the rig. The helicopter landed gracefully, and we sat there for a moment as the rotary blades slowed down, and the world went dead, quiet. "What the hell is going on? Where are the crew?" the pilot said, his voice breaking the silence, the suddenness making me jump in my seat. "They're supposed to come meet us." "I don't know, man," my boss answered, pulling off his headset and unbuckling himself. "This is fucking weird," he mumbled, and turned to me. "Well, kid, let's go look at that radio, see if we can't figure out what's going on out here." I was desperately trying to figure out how to unbuckle the seatbelt, and warm blood flooded to my face as Mr. T lifted an eyebrow. Finally free, I got up too quickly and ended up stumbling out of the helicopter, drawing laughs from both the men. I jumped to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my knee, trying to regain some semblance of cool as the cold wind bit at my face. The boss followed me a bit more gracefully, and I let him take the lead across the pad and down the narrow steel staircase. "I don't understand where the fuck all the people are," he said, our feet clanging loudly as we climbed down the steel stairs. The dark gray sea was visible way below the metal grates that made the steps. The structure felt less solid than I liked. "I guess we start by going to the radio room, figure out what's going on. Maybe they're sick or something." "All of them? Maybe they all got food poisoning and are puking in their bunks." "Well, I damn sure hope not, for their sake," he responded. "There ain't even enough bunks for everyone. They sleep in shifts out here." I made a face as I considered the implications of a rig full of workers having food poisoning at the same time. "Yeah, exactly," he chuckled as we continued down a narrow walkway on the outside of the giant cube. "Here's the radio room. Why don't you poke around and see if you can't find someone to help us figure out what's up?" I swallowed, looking left and right down the walkway before nodding. My reluctance to venture out on the seemingly abandoned structure by myself was overpowered by my fear of Mr. T.'s scorn, and I walked around the corner. A door met me and I pulled it open. A faint smell wafted towards me, vaguely familiar yet impossible to place. The room was pitch black, so I felt around the door for a light switch. I stepped inside, found the switch, and flipped it on. Nothing. I flipped it a few more times, just to make sure. "The light's not working," I called out. "Do you not have a fucking flashlight?" Mr. T answered, his voice catching in the wind. "Get on with it." Well, yeah, I did have a flashlight. It was the idea of entering the pitch-black room by myself, with nothing but a thin beam of light to see by, that made me hesitate. Chewing my lip, I hovered in the doorway. After taking a deep breath, I forced myself to turn on the flashlight, only to reveal an empty corridor. I got 2 steps inside before a loud click from behind me made me jump and do 180, only the door sliding shut. I reached it behind me to push it open, just to make sure I still could, before letting it slide shut again. Next to me was an open door, leading into a bedroom with 6 bunks. I peered inside. The room was empty. Across the corridor was another door, this one closed. I walked up to it, the sound of my boots hitting the floor reverberating through the corridor. I swallowed, hesitated, and lifted a shaking hand to knock. The hollow sound rang through the darkness. Nobody answered. Relief and disappointment flooded through me in equal amounts. I wanted to find someone, but was afraid of whatever had made the people hide in the darkness. My arm was steadier when I knocked on the next door, and soon I had knocked on every door and looked inside the open ones. No people, no answers. Mess hall, empty. Offices, empty. The darkness and the silence crept into me, sending chills down my spine while I apprehensively contemplated the vastness of the sea surrounding us. How deep would it be out here? What was down there in the depths? Where were all the people? The silence was broken only by the sound of my boots hitting the floor and my heart pounding in my chest. I breathed a sigh of relief when I stepped outside the door, into the fresh air. What if my boss was gone? The pilot? I sprinted around the corner and crashed right into the big man. So, I reported my findings, or rather my lack thereof. He could inform me that the radio was working just fine. "But that makes no sense," I protested. "All the people left without a word? Why?" He wasn't a man to speculate. He just shook his head, told me the only thing to do was to report it to the higher-ups and get on with it. "I don't think I heard you right," the mainland radio operator replied after hearing what we had found. "It's empty? There's nobody there? Over empty. Not a soul as far as we can see. Over what the fuck?" A long pause. "Oh, over. Yeah, it's pretty weird. Over. You're sure it's definitely empty? Over." A stern look was sent my way. My attempt at a shrug became some kind of weird jerk due to the adrenaline coursing through me. I mean, I knocked on the doors, but I didn't open them. I mumbled, "Well, we can give her another look over. But if they ain't all gone, most of them are. Over." "Okay." Another long pause. "How about you do that? And in the meantime, I get in touch with some higher-ups. If I don't hear from you in an hour, I'll contact the Coast Guard. Over. You might want to contact the Coast Guard anyway. Only one way off a rig out here. Over. Roger that. Over and out." "Well, kid, Let's go, open them doors. Turned out the rooms weren't all empty. That first door I knocked on, it was locked. Only door on the whole rig that was locked. Mr. T looked at me, took a deep breath, and rammed his shoulder against the door. Once, twice. On the third hit, the wood cracked and the door swung inwards. The first thing that hit me was the smell. The sickly sweet smell that I hadn't been able to put my finger on rolled over me, making me queasy. I shone the flashlight inside the room. I heard Mr. T's sharp intake of breath before I saw it myself. I stumbled backwards and dry heaved once before my breakfast came up. We had finally found a crew member. Only he was dead. The face was swollen, that bluish tint of death almost lost among the mass of bruises covering his face. Part of his skull looked like it had been caved in, and blood had congealed in his eyes. On the hand that I could see, the fingernails were peeled back or ripped out completely. As I stared in shock, Mr. T slowly walked inside the room. "Fella tried to scratch his way out," he said. "Look, see, there are scratch marks all on this door. Come see." Through the shock, I just followed the order. The inside of the door was covered in scratches and blood. There was an oddly shaped bloodstain, almost perfectly round. My eyes traveled slowly down to the man's head. The dent on his forehead and the bloodstain looked to be about the same size. I looked up at my boss, eyes wide. "What? Guess he really wanted to get out, didn't he? How, look here." He grabbed a keychain from the bed. "I don't think you should touch anything," I said as he walked over to the door. The second key fit, turned the lock like nothing. "Mr. T's," he looked back at me wordlessly, and for the first time I could see the fear etched on his face. He tried to scratch his way out when the key was right there. The words fell out of me. "Looks that way." "I think we need to call the Coast Guard," he said, gently nudging the body with the tip of his boot. "Something happened to this here fella." The jiggling corpse was too much for me, and I found myself back in the hallway, spitting bile. We radioed in what we had found, and were told to get off the platform ASAP. The helicopter ride felt like it lasted an eternity, and I kept my eyes on the platform as it disappeared behind us. The sea looked dark, immense, foreboding. The moment we landed, we were met by people in hazmat suits. "They'll have to quarantine us," we were told. Maybe there had been some sort of disease out on the rig. I didn't argue, partly because a plague seemed like a plausible explanation that my mind could cope with, partly because of the armed security guards I spotted behind the hazmat suits. If I knew we'd spend a month in complete isolation, in a tent right there on the tarmac, I might have argued more. A month plagued by nightmares as my brain tried to fill in the gaps of what I had seen, tried to string together explanations, each one more horrifying than the last. Then one day, a man in a dark suit walked right into the tent, informing us that the cause of death had been identified as a gas leak. We were free to go home. I had a million questions, theories, fears. His face remained passive as he listened to my incoherent rant. "It was a gas leak," he repeated. "Believe me." The tone left no doubt about the "or else" he wordlessly tacked onto the sentence. He told us to not talk to the press, or anyone else for that matter, about what we had seen. "But why?" I asked. "Because you don't want to have to meet me again," was all he said. I did believe that, and I never told. Not until this day. People knew I had been the first one out on the rig after the gas leak, so they didn't question the fact that I quit my job, or that I didn't want to talk about it. They stopped asking. It's been so long now, and the accident, the cover-up, it has all been forgotten by everyone but me.